On June 15th, 2017, the bat signal lit up the night above Los Angeles City Hall, turning a piece of pop culture into a public farewell. But that beam of light hid a devastating irony. The very role that made Adam West a global icon also became the label he couldn't shake, shaping his career for decades. For decades, the world saw the bright knight, while West fought to be seen as more than a single role, taking exhausting personal appearance work to keep the money coming in. We must look past the cowl, the sound effects, and the Technicolor explosion of 1966 to find the man shivering underneath. Because before he was Batman, and before he was even Adam West, he was just a lonely boy named Billy standing in the middle of a silent wheat field, dreaming of a life that felt like a movie. This is not just the story of a TV star. This is the story of a man who learned that if you wear a mask long enough, it stops being a disguise and starts being the only thing that holds you together. The story begins as far away from Gotham City as you can possibly get, in Walla Walla, Washington, in September 1928. William West Anderson, Billy to his family, was born into a landscape of golden wheat and silence. His father, Otto Anderson, was a farmer, a man of the earth who was sturdy, pragmatic, and bound to the cycles of the harvest. The kind of man who measured success in bushels and acres, a man of few words and hard hands. However, the gravitational center of Billy's universe was his mother, Audrey Valenne. To understand the psychological complexity of Adam West, you must understand the tragedy of Audrey. She was not a farm wife by nature. She was a creature of the stage, a concert pianist, and an opera singer with a voice that could shatter glass and break hearts. She had toured, performed, and tasted the electric energy of an audience, only to give it all up when she married Otto, and the curtains closed. The opera singer became a mother, and the stage became a kitchen. For young Billy, his mother was a figure of immense, suffocating glamour and profound sadness, whom he later described as dramatic, spiritual, and depressed. He watched her wither, growing up in a house filled not with farm reports, but with the haunting echoes of opera records playing on a phonograph, scratching against the silence of the rural plains. Billy saw the cost of repressed creativity and learned at a cellular level that performance was a way to escape reality. If the farm was dull, you could imagine it was a castle. If the work was hard, you could pretend you were a cowboy. In many ways, Billy became her audience of one, absorbing her need for expression. As a teenager, Billy watched his parents' marriage collapse, and the breakup reshaped the way he learned to protect himself by performing. For Billy, it was an exile. He and his younger brother were uprooted from the farm and moved to Seattle with their mother, leaving behind the open fields and the father he admired but couldn't connect with. This rupture changed him. The gregarious boy became an observer who retreated into his own mind. He began to build walls, not of stone but of charm, realizing that if he was funny, smooth, and played a character, people couldn't hurt him. He later admitted, "I was a little bit of a loner. I lived in my head." It is the classic origin story of the actor. The trauma didn't make him bitter, it made him watchful, studying human behavior the way his father studied the weather. There's a lazy myth that Adam West was just an empty-headed pretty boy, but that read is too shallow. Adam West was, in fact, an intellectual. After high school, he attended Whitman College, where he studied literature rather than drama. He was dissecting the human psyche, learning why people do what they do. This academic background is the secret key to his future success. When he eventually played Batman, he wasn't just acting campy by accident. He was deconstructing the concept of heroism. and applying a psychological framework to the character. He understood the absurdity of the human condition and learned that the only way to deal with the void was to laugh at it. At Whitman, he joined the Beta Theta Pi fraternity and was the golden boy on the surface, handsome, athletic, and popular. He joined the debate team, which is where he honed his trademark, the voice. That baritone, so rich it felt like mahogany, was trained in the debate halls where he learned cadence, how to pause for effect, and that if you spoke slowly and with absolute conviction, people would believe anything you said. But despite the popularity, the A grades, and the social success, the itch his mother had planted remained. He told his father he wanted to go to Hollywood, a dream Otto likely scoffed at. However, just as Billy was preparing to launch his life, the Korean War intervened. He served in the U.S. Army and worked as an on-air announcer for American Forces Network programming, learning how to project calm authority through a microphone. He wasn't fighting with a rifle, he was fighting with morale, acting as the voice telling the troops the news and keeping the connection to home alive. This was his first real acting gig, requiring him to project calm and authority to men who were facing death. He learned the power of the microphone, the intimacy of it, and how to speak to thousands of people while making each one feel like he was speaking only to them. When his service ended, he didn't go back to the farm or straight to Hollywood. He took a detour that would define his comedic timing forever. He went to the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Hawaii in the mid-1950s was a frontier, not yet a state, and felt like the edge of the world where people went to reinvent themselves. William West Anderson arrived with a young wife, very little money, and a lot of ambition. But since ambition doesn't pay the rent, the man with the literature degree and debate championship became a milkman. Picture the future Batman waking up at 3 a.m. in the humid Hawaiian darkness, driving a truck and clinking glass bottles onto doorsteps. It was humble, invisible work, but it gave him time to think and kept him grounded as he pounded the pavement looking for a way into show business. In Hawaii, West found steady work in local television, including the children's show, The Kini Popo Show, where he sharpened the deadpan seriousness that later became his signature. He eventually took over as the host of the live, chaotic, and unscripted program where anything could happen. His co-star was a chimpanzee named Peaches. Working with a chimpanzee on live television is a masterclass in improv, as Peaches would scream, throw things, or refuse to move. While a lesser performer might have panicked or tried to out-crazy the animal, Billy Anderson made a brilliant comedic choice. He decided to treat the chimp with the utmost professional respect. When Peaches went wild, Billy wouldn't laugh. He would look at the camera with a deadpan expression, raise a single eyebrow, and wait. He played the straight man to the primate, realizing that the contrast between his dignity and the chimp's chaos was where the comedy lived. I learned that if I played it deadly serious, it was funny, he later recalled. This was the birth of the Adam West style, that unique blend of stiffness, dignity, and awareness of the absurdity around him. He was practicing for Gotham City. He just didn't know it yet. By 1959, life in Hawaii was shifting. His first marriage had crumbled, a casualty of youth and pressure, but he had found love again with a beautiful Tahitian dancer named Natokarua Nga, Frisbee Dawson. He was a local celebrity, happy in the islands with his new family, but the voice of his mother, the opera singer who gave up, was still whispering in his ear not to settle. He knew that if he stayed in Hawaii, he would be a big fish in a small pond forever. So in 1959, he made the terrifying decision to leave paradise, arriving in Los Angeles with no agent, no job, and a name that sounded too long for a marquee. William West Anderson sounded like a banker or a farmer, so he needed a name that punched. He kept West as a tribute to his middle name and the direction of pioneers, and chose Adam for the first man. The transformation was complete. William Anderson was gone, and Adam West was here. But Hollywood, in 1959, was a fortress of closed doors and velvet ropes. He was 30 years old, ancient by the standards of young discovery. And although he had experience and talent, so did every waiter and gas station attendant in town. He began the grueling, humiliating ritual of the audition circuit, playing cowboys, detectives, and the handsome guy in the background. He was close, standing on the precipice of something massive, needing just one break to show the world he was in on the joke. He didn't know it yet, but a producer named William Dozier was about to buy a carton of Nestle Quick, and that carton of chocolate milk powder would change the course of pop culture history. The night was about to rise, but the sun was setting on his anonymity. History often turns on the smallest, most absurd hinges. For Adam West, destiny didn't arrive in the form of a dramatic Shakespearean monologue or a high-stakes screen test for a prestigious drama. It arrived in a carton of chocolate milk. By the early 1960s, Adam West was a working actor, but he was merely treading water in the vast ocean of Hollywood. He had the looks, the voice, and the presence, but he lacked the spark that separates the reliable journeyman from the star. He was paying the bills by doing something many serious actors considered beneath them: television commercials. In a moment of pure professional humility, West accepted a gig to play a character named Captain Q in a commercial for Nestle Quick. The concept was a spoof of the James Bond craze that was sweeping the world, a suave, tuxedo-clad spy who took himself entirely too seriously while peddling powdered chocolate. A lesser actor would have winked at the camera, letting the audience know he was above the material. But Adam West did what he had learned to do with the chimpanzee in Hawaii. He played it with lethal seriousness. He narrowed his eyes, he pitched his voice into that resonant baritone, and he treated the chocolate milk as if it were nuclear launch codes. William Dozier, a high-powered producer at 20th Century Fox, was sitting in his living room, likely reading a newspaper, when the commercial flickered onto his television screen. He stopped. He watched this tall, statuesque man deliver ridiculous lines with the conviction of a church deacon. Dozier wasn't looking for a comedian for his new project. He was looking for a specific kind of anchor. He was developing a show based on the Batman comic books, but he wanted it to be pop art, a living, breathing Andy Warhol painting. He knew that if the lead actor played it for laughs, the show would become a farce. But if the lead actor played it like a docudrama, the absurdity would be hilarious. In Captain Q, Dozier saw his Bruce Wayne. He saw a man who could stand in the middle of a circus and convince you he was in a cathedral. The contract was signed, and Adam West was given the keys to the kingdom. But as he stood for his costume fittings, having his face cast in plaster for the cowl, he felt a strange duality. He was an actor who wanted to play Lear or Hamlet, yet here he was pulling on satin tights and a purple cape. He later admitted to a moment of hesitation, looking in the mirror and wondering if this was the end of his serious career. He didn't know that he was about to become the most famous face on the planet, nor did he realize that the mask, once applied, is almost impossible to remove. When Batman premiered in January 1966, it didn't just air, it detonated. It was an overnight cultural phenomenon described as Batman IA. To understand the scale of it, you have to realize that in 1966, television was still finding its footing as an art form. Most shows were black and white, rigid, and safe. Batman was an assault on the senses. It was tilted angles, Dutch tilts, vibrant purples and greens, and on-screen sound effects like bam and pow that disrupted the visual language of TV. And at the center of this psychedelic hurricane stood Adam West, the calm eye of the storm. Critics often misunderstand West's performance, dismissing it as campy or cheesy. This interpretation does a disservice to the immense discipline required to pull it off. West made a conscious, intellectual choice to play Batman as the Bright Knight. While modern iterations of the character are defined by trauma, the murder of parents, the darkness of the alley, West's Batman was defined by altruism and an almost aggressive civic duty. He was the deputized protector of the status quo. Watch him closely in those episodes. He never breaks character. When the Joker is turning the city water supply into jelly, West plays the scene with the gravity of a national emergency. This was physically and mentally exhausting work. The costume was a nightmare of 1960s synthetic fabrics, hot, itchy, and restrictive. The cowl pressed against his temples, causing chronic headaches, and the ears had a tendency to flop over if he moved too fast. He was shooting 2 episodes a week, a grueling schedule that required him to be on set from dawn until midnight, constantly running, jumping, and fighting stuntmen. Yet, West became the morale leader of the set. Burt Ward, who played Robin, was young and excitable, often finding himself in dangerous stunt situations. West became a protective, older brother figure, guiding Ward through the madness. There is a specific genius in how West handled the dialogue. The scripts were filled with polysyllabic educational dialogue intended to be funny in its verbosity. Batman wouldn't just say, "Let's go, Robin." He would say, "Come, old chum. We must utilize the Bat computer to ascertain the molecular density of this clue." West delivered these lines with a rhythmic cadence that became musical. He realized that Batman was a figure of authority who needed to reassure the audience, both the children watching for the adventure and the adults watching for the satire, that everything was under control. He was the only sane man in an insane world, and that tension was the engine of the show's comedy. For 2 years, Adam West was the center of the Hollywood universe. The golden cage had descended, and inside it the life was sweet. He was earning a fortune, and his face was on lunchboxes, t-shirts, and toys across the globe. He was no longer the struggling actor William Anderson. He was a god. The parties in the Hollywood Hills were legendary. West, a handsome man in his prime, indulged in the adulation. Women threw themselves at him not because he was Adam, but because he was Batman. He later spoke candidly about this period, describing it as a blur of hedonism and ego. It is hard to judge him for it. Imagine being told by the entire world that you are the greatest hero alive. It is a narcotic more potent than any drug. But the fame was bizarrely specific. People didn't want to meet the actor. They wanted to meet the character. When he went to dinner, fans would expect him to order milk. If he was seen smoking a cigarette or having a drink, parents would cover their children's eyes. He was losing his right to be a flawed human being. The public ownership of his identity was absolute. He recounts stories of women wanting him to wear the cowl in intimate moments, a fetishization of his persona that was both flattering and deeply dehumanizing. He was becoming a living action figure stripped of his interior life. Despite the adoration, cracks were forming in the foundation. The industry, which had embraced the show as a novelty, began to turn up its nose. Serious directors stopped calling. Why would they hire Batman to play a gritty detective or a romantic lead? The very role that made him a star was simultaneously rendering him unemployable as an actor. He was trapped in the Technicolor box. He tried to branch out, releasing a country music album and making appearances out of character, but the public refused to accept it. They wanted the Batusi. They wanted the tights. They wanted the illusion, and they didn't care about the man sweating underneath it. By 1968, the world was changing rapidly. The optimism of the early 60s, the era of Camelot and the Beatles' early pop songs, was curdling into something darker. The Vietnam War was escalating, tearing the American social fabric apart. Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy were assassinated. The streets were filled with protests and tear gas. In this new, gritty reality, a wealthy vigilante in blue satin fighting a man named Egghead suddenly felt obsolete, perhaps even embarrassing. The camp sensibility that had felt fresh and rebellious in 1966 now felt like a relic of a simpler, more naive time. The ratings for Batman began to plummet. The novelty had worn off. The writers tried to introduce new characters, like Batgirl, to revitalize the dynamic, but the writing was on the wall. The network, ABC, looked at the declining numbers and the expensive production costs and made the decision. They swung the axe. Batman was canceled. For Adam West, the news was a complex mixture of devastation and relief. Part of him believed that the cancellation would be his liberation. He thought, now I can go back to being an actor. Now I can show them what else I can do. He was still young, he was wealthy, and he was famous. He assumed the phone would ring with offers for westerns, dramas, and spy thrillers. He packed away the cowl, assuming it was a chapter closed, a stepping stone to a long and varied career. He was wrong. The period immediately following the cancellation of Batman is the most harrowing chapter in Adam West's life. It is the story of a man walking out of a palace and realizing he is standing in a desert. The phone didn't ring, or rather, it rang, but only for humiliations. Producers told his agent bluntly, "We can't cast him. As soon as he walks on screen, the audience laughs. He is Batman." The typecasting was terminal. He had done his job too well. He had merged so completely with the character in the public imagination that Adam West had ceased to exist. The money began to run out. The lifestyle of the Hollywood Hills is expensive to maintain, and without the steady paycheck of the series, the financial pressure mounted. West found himself losing his home, his investments, and his sense of self-worth. He went from being the most invited man in Hollywood to a pariah. He described this time as a spiritual death. He was angry at the producers who had encouraged the camp style, angry at the public for their fickleness, and angry at himself for being trapped. He had to make a choice. He could quit acting and vanish into obscurity, perhaps return to the farm in Walla Walla and drive a tractor. Or he could do the only thing he knew how to do, perform. But the only performance people wanted to buy was the one he was trying to escape. So, the bright knight, the man who had saved Gotham 100 times, found himself packing a bag for a new kind of tour. Not a press tour for a blockbuster, but a tour of county fairs, car shows, and supermarket openings. He was about to enter the wilderness. He was about to learn just how heavy that cape could truly be when the cameras weren't rolling. He hung up the cowl, believing the golden cage was finally unlocked. He dusted off his resume, ready to remind the world that he was Adam West, the serious actor with the literature degree and the deep understanding of human psychology. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the silence from Hollywood became deafening. He hadn't just left a TV show, he had walked off the edge of the map. The industry that had worshipped him only moments ago now looked at his face and saw only a mask, forcing him to take the first steps into a long, lonely exile. The 1970s were a brutal decade for nostalgia. If the 1960s were about technicolor dreams and expanding consciousness, the 1970s were about the hangover. The cultural mood shifted toward realism, grit, and cynicism. In cinema, audiences wanted The Godfather, Taxi Driver, and Serpico. They wanted anti-heroes who bled, cursed, and lost. In this new landscape, Adam West wasn't just unemployed. He was an anachronism. He was a living artifact of a pop culture moment that everyone was desperately trying to forget. West quickly discovered that the golden cage of Gotham had locked him out of his own profession. He would walk into casting offices, a portfolio of serious work from his early career tucked under his arm, only to see the casting director suppress a smirk. He wasn't Adam West, the actor who had studied psychology and literature. He was the guy who danced the Batusi. He was the guy who carried the shark repellent. The industry didn't just reject him, they invalidated him. He was told explicitly and repeatedly, "We can't hire you. You take the audience out of the movie." Bruce Wayne was a billionaire who could buy his way out of any problem. Adam West was a working-class actor with alimony payments, a mortgage, and a dwindling bank account. The irony was suffocating. He had played the wealthiest man in Gotham, yet he was struggling to keep the lights on in Los Angeles. He was forced to move out of his grand home in the Pacific Palisades. He sold his possessions. He watched his circle of friends, the ones who had drunk his champagne in 1967, evaporate into the smog. It was a classic Hollywood tragedy, but West refused to play the role of the victim. He had a family to feed. If Hollywood wouldn't let him be an actor, he would be a spectacle. This is the part of the story that requires us to look at the nature of dignity. What is dignity? Is it refusing to compromise and starving for your art in a garret? Or is it doing whatever is necessary to survive and protect your family? Adam West chose the latter. Unable to land roles in film or television, West hit the road. He entered the world of personal appearances. This wasn't the glitzy convention circuit we know today, with air-conditioned halls and $100 photo ops. This was the carnival circuit. It meant car shows in dusty fairgrounds in the Midwest. It meant grand openings of supermarkets in New Jersey. It meant standing on the back of a flatbed truck in a parking lot, waving to a crowd of 50 people while wearing a costume that he had to sew himself because the studio wouldn't let him keep the original. Imagine the psychological toll. A few years prior, he was the biggest star in the world. Now he was changing into his tights in the dirty bathroom of a gas station because the venue didn't have a dressing room. He was sleeping in budget motels, driving a rental car from town to town, his cape folded in a suitcase next to his toothbrush. But here is the heroic fact that defines his character. He never let the mask slip. When a child approached him at a car show in Ohio holding a battered comic book, that child didn't see a broke, middle-aged actor sweating in polyester. They saw Batman. And Adam West protected that illusion with the ferocity of a guardian. He would crouch down to their level, use the voice, and treat them with the same gravity he used to treat the commissioner. He never looked bored. He never looked bitter. He swallowed his pride 1,000 times a day because he understood that for that one kid, in that one moment, he was magic. He was selling his own humiliation to pay the rent, but he delivered it as a service of love. The lows, however, were profound. In his desperation to stay relevant and solvent, West took gigs that bordered on the surreal. The most infamous of these occurred in the late 70s when he agreed to participate in a daredevil stunt show. One of the strangest gigs came in 1979 in Evansville, Indiana. He agreed to be shot out of a cannon as part of a stunt show. The organizers wanted Batman to fly. West, ever the professional, agreed. He climbed into the capsule wearing the cowl. He later recalled sitting in the darkness of the cannon barrel, waiting for the explosion, thinking about his mother, his literature degree, and the strange trajectory of his life. How did I get here? He must have wondered. I'm a classically trained actor and I'm about to be fired across a fairground like a circus clown. He survived the shot. He dusted himself off, waved to the cheering crowd, and signed autographs. He also took roles in films that are now considered the trash tier of cinema. Movies like The Happy Hooker Goes Washington, 1977, or Zombie Nightmare, 1987. In these films, he often played a parody of himself or a stiff authority figure. The directors hired him for the kitsch factor, for the, "Hey look, it's Batman" recognition. It was exploitative, and West knew it. He knew they were laughing at him, not with him. But he took the check. He did the work. He delivered his lines with professionalism. Even when the script was garbage, he was a craftsman working in a scrapyard. During these years, West's relationship with the Batman character became deeply complicated. It was a marriage he couldn't escape. He later admitted to periods of deep depression and reliance on alcohol to numb the sting of his reality. He would look at the costume hanging in his closet and feel a mix of gratitude and hatred. It was the thing that made him and the thing that destroyed him. He was haunted by the ghost of his own success. He tried to shed the skin. He grew a mustache. He tried to pivot into tougher, more serious roles. But audiences and casting directors kept seeing the cowl before they saw the actor. But no one bought it. To the public, the mustache just looked like Batman with a mustache. However, as the 1980s progressed, something subtle began to shift. The generation of children who had watched Batman in 1966, sitting cross-legged on the floor, mesmerized by the colors, was growing up. They were becoming college students, filmmakers, and writers. And they didn't see Adam West as a joke. They saw him as a foundational part of their childhood happiness. The irony of pop culture is that if you stick around long enough, outdated becomes vintage. Cheesy becomes iconic. West began to notice a change in the way people approached him. The sneers of the 70s were replaced by smiles of recognition. He started attending the early comic conventions, and instead of empty rooms, he found lines wrapping around the block. These weren't just kids anymore, they were adults telling him, "You were my hero. You made me feel safe." He realized that he hadn't just played a character, he had been a surrogate father to a generation of latchkey kids. His stoicism, his morality, and his reliability on screen had imprinted on millions. He began to stop fighting the ghost. He began to make peace with the cowl. He realized that he didn't need Hollywood to validate him. He had the people. And while the industry executives were still laughing in their glass towers, Adam West was out in the real world, shaking hands, realizing that the wilderness wasn't empty. It was full of friends he hadn't met yet. He survived the wilderness long enough for nostalgia to flip the script. As the kids who grew up on his Batman became adults, outdated started to look like iconic, and the industry slowly made room for him again. The year was 1989, and the world was about to catch Batmania for the second time. But this time, Adam West wasn't invited to the party. Director Tim Burton was preparing to unleash his vision of Batman upon the world. It was a vision defined by German expressionism, black rubber, and the manic energy of Michael Keaton and Jack Nicholson. The marketing slogan was simple and brutal. "This is not your father's Batman." For Adam West, that slogan felt like a personal attack. He was the father's Batman. He was the Batman who had carried the torch for 20 years. West made no secret of his desire to be involved in the new film. He wasn't delusional. He knew he was too old to play Bruce Wayne, but he hoped for a nod, a cameo as Thomas Wayne perhaps, or a role as a wise elder, statesman of Gotham. He campaigned for it. He told the press he was ready, but the phone never rang. Warner Brothers and Burton were terrified of the camp stigma. They wanted to distance themselves as far as possible from the Batusi and the shark repellent. They needed the audience to take a man dressed as a bat seriously, and the presence of Adam West would have shattered that illusion. When the movie premiered, it was a colossal, earth-shattering hit. It redefined the summer blockbuster. But for West, it was a moment of profound alienation. He later admitted that he cried when he realized he had been completely erased from the franchise he helped build. He went to see the movie sitting in a theater surrounded by people wearing shirts with the new logo. He critiqued it, calling it the Dark Knight as opposed to his Bright Knight. He felt the violence was gratuitous, the tone too cynical. "I prefer the lighter touch," he said. "I wanted to entertain the kids, not scare them." It sounded like sour grapes to the press, but it was actually a philosophical defense of his legacy. He was watching the culture shift away from optimism toward deconstruction. The 90s were beginning, the era of grunge, irony, and anti-heroes. Adam West felt like a dinosaur staring at a meteor. He assumed his time was truly over. He was destined to be a footnote, a trivia answer, the silly Batman compared to the cool Batman. But while the executives at Warner Brothers were trying to bury the 1966 show, a group of young artists was quietly building a shrine to it. In 1992, Batman, the animated series, premiered. It is widely considered by critics to be the greatest adaptation of the character ever made. It was dark, yes. It was dark deco, painted on black paper to give it a noir atmosphere. But the creators, Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, and Alan Burnett, were children of the 60s. They grew up watching Adam West. They didn't see him as a joke. They saw him as the gateway drug to the world of superheroes. They wanted to honor him, but they didn't want to just give him a throwaway cameo. They wanted to give him a role that mattered. They wanted to write a love letter to Adam West that would also serve as an apology for how the industry had treated him. They wrote an episode titled "Beware the Gray Ghost." If you are a fan of Batman, you know this episode. If you are a fan of Adam West, this episode is holy scripture. The plot is simple, yet devastatingly metatextual. It tells the story of Simon Trent, an actor who used to play a superhero called the Gray Ghost on a classic TV show. Now, Trent is an old man. He is washed up. He can't get work because he is typecast. He is broke, living in a small, dusty apartment surrounded by posters and merchandise from his glory days. Sound familiar? It was an autobiography written in ink and paint. When the producers approached Adam West to voice Simon Trent, they were nervous. They were essentially asking him to play a sad, pathetic version of himself. They were holding up a mirror to his darkest years, the years of the county fairs and the cannon shots. They worried he would be offended. They worried he would storm out. Adam West read the script. He didn't storm out. He understood immediately what they were doing. He saw the empathy on the page. He realized that this wasn't a mockery. It was a catharsis. He signed on. The recording session for Beware the Gray Ghost is the stuff of legend. Voice director Andrea Romano and producer Bruce Timm sat behind the glass, watching their childhood hero step up to the microphone. West didn't use his Batman voice. He didn't use the bright, booming authority of 1966. He used a voice that was tired, a voice that had cracks in it, a voice that sounded like it had spent too many nights in cheap motels. There is a scene in the episode that breaks the heart of every viewer. Simon Trent, desperate for rent money, takes his costume, the Gray Ghost costume, to a toy collector to sell it. "It's not for sale," the collector says, assuming Trent is just a fan. "I'm not buying," Trent says softly. "I'm selling." The collector realizes who he is. He offers him a pittance. Trent takes the money, looking at the empty hangar, and walks out into the rain. When Adam West recorded those lines, the room was silent. He was channeling 30 years of frustration, 30 years of feeling like a commodity. He was exposing his own wounds to the world. It was the bravest performance of his career. He wasn't hiding behind a mask anymore. He was showing us the scars the mask had left behind. In the episode, Gotham City is being terrorized by a villain called the Mad Bomber, who mimics the plots of the old Gray Ghost TV show. Batman, voiced by the legendary Kevin Conroy, realizes he needs help. He needs to find the Gray Ghost. He tracks Simon Trent down to his apartment. Trent is bitter. He tells Batman to go away. "I'm not a hero," he snaps. "I just played one on TV." But Batman persists. He brings the Gray Ghost costume back to him. He asks for help. And in the climax of the episode, Simon Trent puts the costume back on. He runs across the rooftops one last time. The climax of Beware the Gray Ghost is not an action scene. It is a spiritual reconciliation. The Gray Ghost and Batman defeat the Mad Bomber. As the smoke clears, the press surrounds them. For the first time in decades, Simon Trent is a hero again. The cameras are flashing. He feels the warmth of the light, but the most important moment happens in the Batcave. Batman reveals a secret to Simon Trent. He shows him a shrine, not to Batman, but to the Gray Ghost. "I used to watch you with my father," Batman says. "The Gray Ghost was my hero." And then the line that healed 1,000 wounds, "And he still is." When Kevin Conroy, as Batman, said those words to Adam West as the Gray Ghost, it bridged the divide. It was the dark night bowing to the bright night. It was the modern gritty era, acknowledging that it stood on the shoulders of the campy, colorful era. It validated Adam West's entire career. It told the audience, it is okay to love the 60s Batman. He is not a joke. He is the origin. When the episode aired, the reaction was overwhelming. Fans wept. Critics praised it as the most emotional episode of the series. But for Adam West, it was something more. It was vindication. He later said that the episode gave him a new perspective on his legacy. He stopped fighting the typecasting. He stopped resenting the cowl. He realized that if he was Simon Trent, then he was also the hero who inspired the heroes. The success of Batman, the animated series, kicked open a door that had been welded shut for decades. Suddenly, Adam West was cool again. He wasn't cool in the way Brad Pitt was cool. He was cool in a new postmodern way. He was retro cool. The Generation Xers and the early millennials, steeped in irony, looked at Adam West and saw a master of deadpan comedy. He began to lean into the joke, but this time he was the one telling it. In the mid-90s, he appeared on The Simpsons in the classic episode Mr. Plow. He plays himself, but a senile, bizarre version of himself who reminisces about the Pure West Batman while dancing the Batoozy at a car show. And I didn't need molded plastic to improve my physique. Pure West. The line became an instant meme before memes existed. He started appearing on Late Night with Conan O'Brien. Conan, a massive fan of the 60s show, treated West like royalty. They did sketches where West would do mundane things with extreme gravity, like looking for a lost contact lens or ordering a sandwich. West discovered a new superpower: self-parody. He realized that if he made fun of himself first, no one else could hurt him. He took the caricature of washed-up actor Adam West and inflated it until it was so big it became a performance art piece. He was no longer the victim of the joke. He was the ringmaster. He wrote an autobiography, Back to the Batcave, 1994. In it, he was honest, funny, and surprisingly touching about his struggles. He went on a book tour, but this wasn't the circuit of dust and diesel from the 70s. These were packed bookstores. These were university lecture halls. He was being rediscovered. The wilderness was behind him. He had walked through the desert of obscurity, survived the canyon of humiliation, and climbed the mountain of redemption. But the final act of his career, the act that would introduce him to an entirely new generation who had never even seen the 1966 show, was still to come. It would come from a young animator named Seth MacFarlane, who had a crazy idea about a town called Quahog and a mayor who was absolutely delightfully insane. The Gray Ghost had returned, but Mayor West was about to be elected. The Gray Ghost had healed the wound, proving his dramatic worth, but Adam West wasn't finished yet. He had reclaimed his dignity, but he hadn't yet proven he was current. To truly conquer the new millennium, he needed a vehicle that could harness his unique, bizarre energy, a role that wouldn't just acknowledge his past, but weaponize it. He had survived the drama of the 60s and the nostalgia of the 90s, but the 2000s offered him a chance to do something he had never fully done before. Take the joke that had been used against him for 30 years and become the one laughing the loudest. By the year 2000, Adam West was in his 70s. For most actors, this is the twilight, the time for quiet retirement, perhaps a Lifetime Achievement Award, and fading gracefully into the background. But Adam West was about to catch lightning in a bottle for the third time. Enter Seth MacFarlane. MacFarlane was a young wunderkind of animation, creating a show called Family Guy. He was part of the generation that had grown up worshiping the 1966 Batman. He didn't just like Adam West. He understood the specific frequency of Adam West's comedy. He understood that West's genius lay in his delivery, the way he could say the most insane, nonsensical things with the gravitas of a network news anchor. MacFarlane created a character for the show, the mayor of the fictional town of Quahog. Originally, the character was just going to be a generic politician, but MacFarlane had an idea. Why not cast Adam West? And why not name the character Adam West? It was a risky meta joke. Usually when actors play themselves, it's a cameo, but this was a recurring role. MacFarlane approached West's agent. West, who had learned to be cautious about how Hollywood used him, asked to read the script. The script involved the mayor becoming convinced that water was stealing the town's water, so he was stabbing the ocean with a knife. West read it. He paused, and then he laughed. "I'll do it," he said, "but on one condition. We have to make him crazier. He can't just be a bad mayor. He has to be from another planet." This decision sparked one of the greatest comedic revivals in TV history. Mayor Adam West wasn't just a role. It was a masterpiece of surrealism. Whether he was marrying his own hand, sending all the town's police to Cartagena to look for a fictional character, or shouting at a pizza delivery guy, West committed to the bit with 100% intensity. He wasn't playing Batman anymore. He wasn't playing the Gray Ghost. He was playing a funhouse mirror version of his own public persona. He took the delusional actor trope and owned it so completely that it became endearing. A new generation of kids who had never seen an episode of the 1966 Batman, fell in love with him. To them, he wasn't the caped crusader. He was the mayor from Family Guy. He had achieved the impossible. He had transcended his own typecasting by becoming a different kind of icon. The last 15 years of Adam West's life were a victory lap. The struggle was over. The rent was paid. The validation was absolute. He became a fixture on the convention circuit, but the vibe had changed. In the 70s, the conventions were sad, dusty affairs. Now, they were massive pop culture celebrations, like San Diego Comic-Con. West would sit at his booth not as a desperate has-been, but as the king. People would wait in line for hours just to shake his hand. And here is the thing that everyone who met him says: he was kind. He never rushed a fan. He listened to their stories. He heard thousands of people say, "You were my childhood," or "You helped me through a hard time," or "My dad and I used to watch you together." He absorbed that love. He later said in an interview, "I realized that Batman wasn't a burden. It was a gift. It was a key that opened the hearts of millions of people. Why would I want to throw away that key?" He finally received his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2012. It was long overdue. When he stood at the podium surrounded by his family, Burt Ward, Robin, and Ralph Garman, his friend and collaborator, he looked out at the crowd and smiled. He made a joke about not stepping on him, but you could see the emotion in his eyes. The boy from the wheat fields of Walla Walla had made it. He had conquered Hollywood, been chewed up by it, survived the wilderness, and returned as a legend. In 2017, the news broke quietly at first, then with a ripple of shock. Adam West had leukemia. He had kept it private. He didn't want the world to pity him. He wanted to be remembered as strong. On June 9th, 2017, he passed away peacefully in Los Angeles. He was 88 years old. The reaction was immediate and universal. It wasn't just celebrity dies. It felt like a family member had passed. Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram were flooded with tributes, but they weren't just from fans. Mark Hamill, the Joker, wrote about his kindness. Ben Affleck and Val Kilmer paid their respects. Seth MacFarlane wrote a eulogy about his comedic brilliance, but the most poignant tribute came from the city he had protected for so long. We return to where we started, June 15th, 2017, Los Angeles City Hall, the Bat Signal. It's rare for a city to turn an icon from fiction into an official public tribute, but that night Los Angeles did exactly that. But for Adam West, the red tape was cut. The mayor of Los Angeles, Eric Garcetti, stood with Police Chief Charlie Beck. They weren't there as politicians. They were there as fans. "We don't have a Commissioner Gordon," Mayor Garcetti told the crowd, "but we have an Adam West." When they flipped the switch and that yellow oval with the black bat hit the tower, the crowd cheered. But then a hush fell. People looked up, tears streaming down their faces. Why did we cry for Adam West? We cried because he represented a time in our lives when things were simple. He represented a world where good always triumphed over evil, where the bad guys were just misguided, and where a hero would stop running to make sure that you looked both ways before crossing the street. We cried because we knew we would never see his like again. In an era of gritty reboots, anti-heroes, and cynical deconstruction, Adam West was pure. He was the bright knight. He walked in the sun so he didn't have to fear the shadows. Adam West's life was not a tragedy. It was a comedy in the classical sense, a story that moves from confusion to order, from isolation to connection. He taught us that it is okay to be silly. He taught us that dignity isn't about being serious. It's about being true to yourself, even if you're wearing blue satin tights. He taught us that if you can laugh at yourself, you are invincible. In the final analysis, Adam West was not defined by Batman. Batman was defined by Adam West. He took a two-dimensional drawing and gave it a human soul. He gave it a sense of humor. He gave it a heart. Somewhere in a wheat field in Walla Walla, the ghost of a little boy named Billy Anderson is looking up at the sky. He isn't looking for a bat signal. He is looking at the stars, and he is smiling because he knows he made it. He became the hero, and he did it without ever wearing a mask that hid who he truly was. He was the bright knight. Long may he shine.